Greetings, my lovely viewers. Today Untouchable Facts brings you a movie titled The Door in the Floor. Ted, a fruitful creator, and Marion, their roofed oceanside house on an island, pictures of their two children, Tom and Timmy, who unfortunately died in an auto collision a couple of years prior, are wherever in the house, with the shock actually having an influence on Marion. Ted is focusing on his work, yet has sorrow from their passings. Alice takes care of Ruth, and she is mindful of the occurrence that asserted the lives of her siblings. One day, Ted employs Eddie as his partner to assist with modest assignments and drive him since his permit had been suspended 3 months earlier. He converses with Marion about Eddie, and they talk about how their relationship has soured since the demise of their children. Marion acknowledges Ted's idea that they enjoy some time off from each other. Ruth has an unnerving dream that equivalent night. Furthermore, looks for comfort from Ted. She falls snoozing after Ted peruses her a story bin involving Ruth's fantasy. As motivation, he begins to compose a book. Eddie is starting his new position as Ted's collaborator the next morning, so Marion goes to get him. He is promptly attracted to Maria when he sees her rather than Ted. Subsequent to taking him to Ted's home, Marion gets back to her and Ted meets with Eddie and goes over his work obligations. Moreover, he illuminates him that he will live in the home proceeding. He is excited to be working with Ted since he gazes upward to him and tries to be a fruitful creator like him. While showing him around the house, Ted converses with him about the condition of his union with Marion, what their identity is as of now isolating from. As the story goes on, it becomes clear that Marion goes through a day at the inn so Ruth can invest energy with both of her folks. Moreover, he meets Alice, Ruth's sitter, who is a decent young lady, and furthermore a distributed creator, as well as painting. Ted works with a model named Evelyn to take photographs. He much of the time portrays little kids in meager clothing in his artistic creations. Eddie goes to the theater with Marion. After she visits the house one day, she clears up for him that she doesn't eat well at home, so she came to eat, and he gets back to the house soon thereafter. He takes a gander at an image of Marion and begins to sex himself. However, Ted and Ruth figured out how to get him, barely trying not to be secured. Eddie visits the ocean side the following day and notices Marion while she is wearing a swimsuit. He finds her clothing when he returns home later. He begins to have intercourse to himself again, yet Marion gets him she's statements of regret for having gotten him and guarantees him that she isn't angry with him on the grounds that everybody at his age does it. Eddie concedes to pondering her since they went on their most memorable date. When Eddie made his admission the next day while being dropped off at Evelyn's home, Marion stays quiet. Marion had left her clothing there for him that night. He sees Eddie and Marion go out to supper together, and during their discussion, they examine the reasons he doesn't ask Alice out on a date. She is informed by Eddie that Alice has no interest in him. They get back later, having an extensive discussion. The following day, Marion visits Eddie's room, also clears up for him the meaning of each image there. She entices him, and they draw near during this discussion. The next day, Ted takes Eddie out what's more, peruses his book to a horde of spectators, and he finds that Ted puts together his books with respect to his own encounters. Ted, when they return home, thank you for being here, Eddie. Marion has been more joyful than she has been in quite a while since he showed up a couple of evenings later. Ruth goes into Marion's room and notices Eddie. Furthermore, Marion having a sexual experience at the point when Ruth observes Eddie and Marion having a confidential second. She starts to cry. She is supported by Marion the following day. In the wake of finding out about the relationship, Ted talks with Eddie about it. Ted illuminates Eddie that he needs authority of Ruth and that he needs him to affirm, and he stranges Marion with regards to why she stays with Ted. She answers that Ted is a decent dad who pays special attention to Ruth. She likewise says as she loads him for his affinity for painting and for taking photos of her in her clothing. Following a couple of days, Eddie asks Marion one evening about the occurrence that guaranteed the existences of her children. Marion separates in tears and stays quiet. Something similar evening, Ruth was shown pictures. She loses one, cutting her finger. She is taken to the specialist by Eddie and Mary. Ted berates Eddie, pardoning Ruth the photographs. He comprehends that Ruth ought to stay with Marion after the separation, since she will be content there. The following day, Marion starts crying and lets Eddie know that she is leaving soon as they are having a sexual experience. Ted, who has become focused on Evelyn, employs Eddie to convey every one of the artistic creations back to her. The time he visits Evelyn's home, infuriated, she lets him know that Ted must visit her on Friday. While Eddie is gone, he gets through the window to help Evelyn after she accidentally locks herself out of the house at night. Marion lets Eddie know that he will convey Ted to Evelyn's home on Friday, however won't return that way Ted should travel solo home, permitting Marion to take all the photographs of her children with her the next day. When Eddie conveys Ted to Evelyn's home, she is incensed and destroys every one of the compositions that Ted had sent. When Eddie gets back, he takes Ruth to the specialist without anyone else that when Marion leaves, she will not be there in the interim. Evelyn stalks Ted and attempts to run him over with her vehicle anyway. He hurries to the ocean side prior to asking to have a harmed picture fixed in a Photoshop, thinking about that he knows that Ruth will be vexed on the off chance that she doesn't see her MOM in the image when she returns home. He has denied admittance to it by the supervisor anyway. The chief concurs after Eddie keeps in touch with Demon portrays the circumstance, remembering his for Marion Sissue Gibson's portrayal. Ted succeeds in getting away and ends up at a bookshop where he is encircled by companions. Two little kids who are his huge fans get his attention as he starts marking signatures. He demands their consent to drop him off at his home. He first puts on something else at the young ladies' home where they take him. The young ladies and their mother then, at that point, energetically concur when he says that he needs to paint them. Ted shows up before the expected time with the young lady's help and notices Marion leaving. She at last leaves for New York with him expressing nothing to her, and he returns to the house conveying Ruth. Ted strikes Eddie in the nose out of fury. Ted is informed by Eddie that Marion has left for good and has taken every last bit of her child's photos. Eddie is given up by Ted, who additionally demands that he let the accompanying day. Ted finds it trying to look after Ruth and her sitter later. Marion leaves. Alice stops her situation. Ted imparts to Eddie that their youngsters died in a mishap and that he is unglued about everything due to their inebriation and unpracticed driving. They crashed into a truck which assisted with diminishing the torment. Ruth was conceived to Marion, yet nothing different. As a result, Eddie is disheartened by the tale and can't comprehend Marion's choice to leave her little girl. The next day, Ted is visited by Evelyn's worker, who illuminates him that Evelyn has terminated him in expansion to recruiting his significant other to cook and look after Ruth. Ted likewise employs him as a driver. Eddie says goodbye to Ted, previously getting back workers of Evelyn and his life partner. Ruth needs her great consideration. The Door in the Floor is a complex story that explores several themes and lessons. Here are a few. Grief and loss. The film highlights how difficult it can be to deal with the loss of a loved one and the different ways that people cope with grief. Family dysfunction. The Cole family is dysfunctional, and the film shows how secrets, lies, and betrayals can tear a family apart. Consequences of infidelity. The story shows how infidelity can have devastating consequences on a marriage and a family. Coming of age. Eddie, the young assistant, is at a stage in his life where he is discovering who he is and what he wants. The film explores the challenges and opportunities of coming of age. Writing as catharsis. Ted Cole uses his writing to deal with his grief and work through his feelings. The film shows how writing can be a form of catharsis and a way to process emotions. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment to Untouchable Facts.